for the first Trump administration, Mr. Mike Davis. Mike Davis, always good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's just start with the picks that President Trump has made. You were very, very active before the election talking about the importance of putting strong leadership back into these law enforcement agencies, including the DOJ. What do you think about his picks so far?
President Trump keeps hitting grand slam after grand slam with his cabinet picks and even sub-cabinet picks. You see this with Pam Bondi as President Trump's pick to serve as the next attorney general. She's been Florida's attorney general for 8 years. She's unquestionably qualified. She's bold. She's fearless. She's a DC outsider, and she's going to bring much needed reforms to a very badly broken Justice Department. And she's going to have a lot of good help with people like Todd Blanche, who's going to be the deputy attorney general, and Emil Bove, who's going to be his deputy, and John Sauer, the solicitor general of the United States, and Gail Slater, my friend, running the antitrust division, and Harmeet Dillon running the civil rights division. We just keep winning. We keep winning so much from President Trump that we're getting tired of winning, I think.
Yeah, I mean, these are all names we know. I just give people a sense of the seismic shift that this is going to make in terms of how DOJ operates.
The Justice Department is going to return to delivering justice instead of being a woke and weaponized behemoth that goes after political enemies like Trump, his top aides like Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro, who went to prison for constitutional executive privilege going back 250 years to George Washington. The Justice Department's not going to persecute Americans like the Biden Justice Department did with January 6 defendants, according to the Supreme Court's Fisher ruling last June. The Trump Justice Department is not going to go after parents outraged by gender chaos in schools and the resulting rapes in high school bathrooms. They're not going to go after pro-life Christians, including putting 75-year-old Christians in prison for praying at abortion clinics. The Trump Justice Department, under the leadership of Pam Bondi, is going to make sure that justice is blind, that we restore our justice system so we don't have to worry about a woke and weaponized justice system.
You know, the media tried to make it seem like all these civil employees at DOJ would resign. Number one, is that true? And number two, is that a bad thing?
I hope they do resign, because you know what? Any of these Justice Department employees, whether they're agents or prosecutors or anyone who worked with them on the outside, if they conspired to politicize and weaponize intel agencies and law enforcement against American citizens for non-crimes, not only should they lose their jobs, they should go to prison under conspiracy against rights, 18 U.S.C. Section 241, a very serious federal civil rights felony. And the Biden Justice Department's very well aware of this 18 U.S.C. Section 241 because it's one of Jack Smith's bogus charges against President Trump in the January 6th case in D.C. for the non-crime of objecting to a presidential election, which is allowed by the Electoral Count Act of 1887 and the First Amendment. They went after Trump, his top aides, his allies, his supporters for non-crimes. That is a crime in itself. That is conspiracy against rights, 18 U.S.C. Section 241. And as they always say, nobody's above the law. If they've done nothing wrong, they have nothing to worry about. If a grand jury in Fort Pierce, Florida, indicts them, then obviously the charges are legitimate, so they better lawyer up.
So Trump, in this Meet the Press interview, when Kristen Welker tried to push the limit and talk about him going after his political enemies, basically said, no, I'm focused on the future. My retribution will be success. But then he left the door open for people like Pam Bondi and others to pursue that by saying, look, if these people have committed a crime, they should be dealt with. So if you're these people who are asking Biden potentially for a preemptive pardon, or Biden's asking them if they want one, should they be worried if they didn't? I mean, like, where does that stand? Because I was trying to figure out if Trump's saying, hey, look, I'm not going to go after him, but hey, maybe Pam Bondi does.
Well, I would say this, the biggest tell of all, Sean, is the fact that they're asking for a preemptive pardon. If they've committed no crime, why the hell do they need a pardon? And that is pretty obvious that they know that they've committed a crime, a series of very serious crimes. Again, when you politicize and weaponize intel agencies in law enforcement at every level, federal, state, and local, to go after your political enemies, you have engaged in a very serious federal civil rights criminal conspiracy against rights, 18 USC Section 241. And President Trump, he, as the president of the United States, he has the constitutional authority to order his attorney general to open a criminal probe or to prosecute someone. Trump's not going to do that. And guess what? He doesn't need to do that because the evidence is so clear. And when the prosecutors present this evidence to a grand jury, whether it's Fort Pierce, Florida, or wherever they choose to present this grand jury, there's a very obvious federal crime, actually a series of crimes.
So let's take one, for example. I find it laughable that everybody dismisses what Liz Cheney did. So first, before we get into the case, just explain to people, because you can do it much better than I can, what these new texts reveal between Liz Cheney and Cassidy Hutchinson, who was that star witness, and why this is a problem. Because I have my issues, but I am not the constitutional expert that you are. What did Liz Cheney do wrong legally?
Well, it seems to me the evidence could indicate that Liz Cheney pressured Cassidy Hutchinson to change her congressional testimony falsely to fit a political narrative. And if that's the case, there are so many problems with that. It could be subornation of perjury, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, witness tampering. There's a whole bunch of crimes that could have been committed here. Now, members of Congress have immunity called speech or debate clause. You know, these same people who said President Trump wasn't immune from a criminal prosecution for his official acts, not his personal misconduct. His official acts are sure going to be clinging to speech or debate clause, congressional immunity. I don't think congressional immunity is going to protect Liz Cheney from criminal charges in this case. And, you know, maybe we'll just have to see if the Trump 47 brings the charges against Liz Cheney, and maybe she can spend a lot of money on lawyers and try to vindicate her legal position like they did to Trump and his top aides and his supporters on January 6th, parents, Christians, people who are still sitting in the D.C. gulag 4 years after January 6th. I think it's going to be important for the people who pushed this lawfare and election interference, this criminal conspiracy against rights for non-crimes. I think they must face severe legal, political, and financial consequences for their real crimes, including criminal indictments.
Yeah, I want to get to January 6th in just a minute. But let me just continue down the thread with Liz Cheney, because I want to get your expert opinion on this. The thing that I thought was most interesting about this is that Cassidy Hutchinson was represented by counsel. Her lawyer was Stefan Passatino. Liz Cheney went around counsel, from what I can see in these texts, and went straight to Cassidy and said, hey, can we talk? Because Liz Cheney is an attorney, or even if she wasn't, is that in itself a legal violation?
Well, it's an ethics violation for an attorney to talk to a represented party. And Liz Cheney would know that. And I realize that she's probably never been a real lawyer in her life. Maybe her daddy took the bar exam for her because her daddy's given her every job in her life. But she should know as a lawyer, if she passed the bar exam, particularly the professional responsibility part of that. If you're a lawyer, you can't go around the back of another lawyer and talk to their client. That's a very serious.
Would the speech and debate clause protect her on that, or is that could she be disbarred for that?
Well, I mean, there should be disbarment proceedings, or at least disciplinary proceedings. She could try to raise that as a legal issue. She might prevail. Who knows? We're kind of Liz Cheney laughed when President Trump tried to bring up presidential immunity, and now she may need her own congressional immunity to save her ass.
Yeah, you mentioned the January 6th, folks. President Trump's talked about a pardon there. In my mind, there's two different issues here. There are people that may, and I don't follow every case, but there are people that hit law enforcement or engaged in clear criminal activity. And then after talking to folks like Alan Dershowitz, there are people who got swept up and are being kept in jail. Can you explain where all these people lie? Like, how many of them just got swept up? How many of them potentially are real cases? And what this all means? Because I can't believe the stories I hear where people are sitting in a jail cell without any due process.
I would say this, and I've very publicly advocated this to President Trump. I think President Trump should pardon almost all January 6th defendants. And for the handful who are actually violent against police officers and the like, then those people should have their sentences commuted to a more reasonable sentence, because nothing that happened on January 6th, 2021 calls for a 22-year prison sentence, especially when this Biden Justice Department, at the same time, they've spent an ungodly amount of resources going after January 6th defendants for the last 4 years and politically persecuting them under the Supreme Court's Fisher decision last June. This Biden Justice Department has given amnesty to the much more deadly and destructive BLM and Antifa rioters who caused billions in damage, killed dozens, attacked the Portland federal courthouse on a nightly basis, attacked the White House, St. John's Church, the Secret Service guard station outside the White House, Senator Rand Paul, a senator leaving the White House. When people start caring about BLM and Antifa, I'll start caring about January 6th.
You know, what's interesting about the whole January 6th thing, when you look at how this thing has played out, to your point, I mean, the juxtaposition between the BLM folks and the January 6th folks, I find that fascinating. But I also looked at this IG report, the Inspector General report the other day, that said, well, we couldn't find any direct evidence that FBI agents were there, but there were a bunch of informants. So do you believe that report, or do you believe that should be further investigation into the FBI's role on January 6th?
There definitely should be further investigation. This report said that they had at least 26 FBI paid contractors at January 6th. 23 of them apparently showed up on their own, which I find laughable. But they admit that at least 3 of those FBI paid contractors were working that day on January 6th, right? So what the hell were they doing, right? And so they keep saying that it wasn't a Fedsurrection. Well, we know that at least 26 paid feds, whether they're agents or contractors, it makes no difference. They had 26 people paid by the FBI there on January 6th. And that doesn't include all the other federal agencies. That's just the FBI. That doesn't include federal, state, local outside of the FBI.
Well, also, doesn't it undermine the idea of this being spontaneous? Hey, we heard this thing on the mall. We all marched to the Capitol. Because why would a bunch of informants be there ahead of time if it wasn't premeditated?
Yeah, I always say this, Sean. January 6th was a lawful protest permitted by the National Park Service that devolved into a riot. And there were 3 categories of people who were there that day. There were people who were there peacefully outside, not trespassing, even if you think they're crazy, even if you think they're wrong, they have an absolute First Amendment right to be there. Then you have people who trespassed, and then you have people who were violent. But I'll tell you this, if the FBI or other law enforcement agents were opening doors, breaking windows, and letting people in, I don't know how you can charge someone with trespass.
Well, Mike, in one video I saw, they've got this guy in handcuffs, and at least, again, I don't know this for certain, but that online they were claiming this guy's an FBI informant. They walk him over, he's got his hands behind his back, they undo it, and he fist bumps the guy and walks out. And I'm thinking to myself, some of these things don't add up. Like, I still don't understand who Ray Epps is. How does a guy who says on videotape, let's go to the Capitol, not face any charges?
Yeah, and here's something you should really ask, Sean. Of those 26 FBI agents, those are FBI paid contractors who were there on January 6th, the FBI says, 3 of them were working, the other 23 were not. how come none of those 23 who were not working, how come they were not charged with any crimes, right? Apparently like 11 of them trespassed into the building. It seems like they're rounding up every grandma around America for the last 4 years. But none of those 23 paid FBI contractors have been charged with any crime, even though they were supposedly there off duty that day.
How important is it in light of this discussion that we're having now that Kash Patel becomes the next director of the FBI?
I love Kash Patel. He's a good friend of mine. He's going to go in there and bring much needed reforms to the FBI. And I'll tell you this, he's a former public defender. He's a former national security prosecutor. He got an award. He got awards from the Obama Justice Department for being a national security prosecutor. He was on the House Intel Committee as a senior lawyer. He worked in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. He worked in the White House National Security Council. He was the chief of staff at the Pentagon. No one is more qualified to go lead the FBI, and the FBI should be shaking at his boots because Kash Patel is not going to be one of their buddies. He's going to be buddies with the rank and file FBI directors who understand their job is to go after real criminals, violent crimes, migrant criminals who are like Venezuelan gangs who are terrorizing cities. But if you're one of these woke federal agents working with these woke prosecutors to go after your political enemies, say, for example, these January 6th prosecutions, these FBI agents may be finding themselves changing diapers on the southern border under FBI Director Kash Patel.
All right, I want to move over to the Supreme Court. I think one of the biggest legacies of President Trump's first term are the federal judges he appointed and the Supreme Court justices that he appointed. How much of an opportunity is he going to have during the second term to continue that effort?
Well, I mean, I would say this. We broke so much China in President Trump's first term, Senate China, when I was the chief counsel for nominations on the Senate Judiciary Committee. I broke so much China, and we were able to set up a conveyor belt of Trump's judicial nominees and got a near record number of them confirmed. Justice Gorsuch, my former boss, Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Barrett, a near record number of lower federal court judges, including to the critically important federal courts of appeals. Unfortunately, President Biden was able to take advantage of that conveyor belt that we set up. And so he confirmed a record number of lower court judges. So there aren't a lot of spots to fill, but you also have, I think we have like 30 spots to fill, which is a good amount, but it's not going to be like the last time, right? But it's still critically important that we fill these spots. But you could see 1, 2, 3, maybe more retirements on the Supreme Court over the next 4 years.
So who would that be? Who would those 3 be? If in a perfect storm?
Well, if I name check these justices, Sean, then I get phone calls from their former law clerks saying,
all right, how about this? Are there any liberal justices among the ones that are there that you would say there's are at the age where, like, Sonia Sotomayor, is she somebody?
I mean, Sonia Sotomayor's up at an age bracket where she could consider retiring. And, I clerked on the Supreme Court. I don't say that disrespectfully. I actually adore her.
No, it's just a reality.
Yeah, I adore her personally. She's like one of my liberal aunts with whom I fight at Christmas. We fight all the time, but I still adore her. But look, I mean, just look at the ages of these justices.
Yeah.
If you just look at the past, he could appoint 1, 2, 3, maybe more justices in this next term. And I'll tell you this: the Article 3 project is going to be his leading outside defenders on these picks, like we have been before, like we have been on the lawfare. President Trump has said he's going to rely on the Article 3 project to help him pick his judges, and we look forward to doing that.
All right, last question I want to ask you, Mike Davis. What is the status? Like, there's been a flurry of lawfare aimed at Trump, trying to get him civilly, criminally. What's the bottom line status, quickly, about where it stands?
The bottom line is this: is the Biden Democrats threw everything they had at Trump. They tried to bankrupt him. They tried to throw him in prison for life 4 times for non-crimes. They tried to take him off the ballot illegally, unconstitutionally. They tried to take off his head twice when they underfunded his Secret Service protection. And guess what? Teflon Don survived all of this. He's going to beat all of this lawfare. He pulled the rabbit out of the hat like 6 different times to beat this. The Article 3 project was his key ally in this. And President Trump is not going to Rikers Island. He's going back to the White House.
But just lastly, is there anything he needs to worry about in the next 4 years legally, criminally or civilly?
I mean, they're going to try to do everything they can to go after him. But guess what? I'm going to strongly push the Trump 47 Justice Department to open criminal probes on this illegal lawfare and election interference. 18 USC Section 241, a big grand jury down in Fort Pierce, Florida. I hope that these Democrat operatives, lawyers, witnesses, agents, even judges, I hope they understand that nobody's above the law.
Awesome. Mike Davis, appreciate you and all that the Article 3 Project does to support, frankly, just the law and what we're supposed to be doing. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Thank you, Sean.
You bet. All right, guys, what an interview with Mike Davis. But now I'm going to shift gears a